You're very welcome to the polling station with Johnny Ward and William Kedjanyi. How are you, William?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, so here we are on Star Sports TV. We're going to briefly discuss the Dublin Bay South by-election, which went the way of the hot favourite, Ivana Bacik, and what repercussions that might have. Before we take a spin across the Atlantic Ocean, we're going to check in on what's going on in the US and potential value in backing Donald Trump for the Republican nomination down the line. Who would have thunk it? Before all of that, we're going to talk about British politics. Boris Johnson today saying that online racists will be barred from football games, which just seems such an easy thing to say from a man who has such a checkered history with regard to everything, really. But I think in all joking aside, having William here alongside me, we should be able to give something of a balanced view as to race politics in the UK at the moment. And quite frankly, the disgusting scenes that we saw subsequent to England's being knocked out of the Euros by Italy. I guess before we get to that, William, the Irish election, when we spoke about this last week, Ivana Bacik was 3s on, and it became apparent that was, we've had a few short prices turned over on the podcast of late, but it became apparent that wasn't actually a bad 3s on shot. But this was a really interesting election because Labour, which has been polling give or take 3% nationally, topped the poll. And that was one of the stories of the election. Another of the stories that Fine Gael has no seat in the wealthiest constituency in the country, which is a little bit of a kind of a victim of circumstance, but interesting nonetheless. But I think the main thing to take out of it was Fianna Fáil, traditionally the biggest party in the country, had a shockingly bad 5% result, and there's massive pressure now on Micheál Martin. I'm not sure if you've been following this much, but it actually very interesting times. We have a very mixture of kind of politics in the south that we've never had in the south of Ireland, where Sinn Féin is now likely the biggest party in the south and the north, and interesting times ahead.
Yeah, very much so. Interesting test case as well. Yet another election where the local factors completely superseded the national picture. And that might be something for punters to watch out for over the next couple of years. National polling sometimes, on occasion, doesn't correlate very well to a particular contest, especially if those contests are run on particular issues. We've had housing. We've also had development, of course, with the Lib Dem victory in Cheshire and Amersham. We've had, I don't really know how to describe Batley and Spen. There were a lot of local issues. It was a very grim campaign. But long story short, in the betting opportunities that you'll get over the next couple of years before an election, just makes sense to be really keyed in locally. It makes sense to do your research. It makes sense not to take the polling nationally as gospel. Now, that's absolutely not a call to disregard polling. It's really, really, I think, one of the best tools you can use. But definitely always be doing your local research, because as we saw there, I think if you'd gone and you searched up some national polls in Ireland, you wouldn't have had a Labour candidate coming in very close, let alone being a 3s on shot.
Yeah, it's strange. And funnily enough, Ivana Bacik, she got a lot of credit for her election poster, which was sort of a cartoon of her on a bike, which kind of maybe encroached on the Green territory as well, which I think all political parties are going to try to do henceforth, because there's really no other game in town in some respects. But it was interesting in that regard. But just going to another Labour Party, Keir Starmer. Sir Keir, he visited Northern Ireland since we were last on, and he rather, I guess, predictably enough, he talked down the notion of a united Ireland in the near future. But these are good times for him in some respects, because, I don't think the Conservatives come out well out of, the football, really, what's been happening. Priti Patel making stupid statements on Twitter about football coming home and all that. Boris, who clearly has no interest in football, promising potentially a national holiday on the Monday. But the undercurrent of all these racial tensions that aren't unrelated to why Brexit was voted in the first place. I think a narrow-minded English nationalism for me. All these things have come to the fore now. And I don't think Boris, I don't think he can lie his way through this, because his track record is so poor. But from your perspective, and race politics is almost a glib kind of way of describing this, what are the ramifications of the last few days, football and politics-wise?
The ramifications are that we have a team or a national figure or a set of national figures who are admired and respected, I think, beyond the political realm. Don't get me wrong, those statements that they've made are clearly political, and in many cases they carry, I think, a broad amount of public support. But people love the English national football team to a level where I don't really think you could get a politician to dream of. And that makes them politically quite powerful, not only in sort of their direct interventions, as Tyrone Mings demonstrated yesterday, just on the personal note, I think it was absolutely right to do so. I could not see any disagreement with that position, because that is what Patel said. But also it changes the conversation in many respects, mainly because, firstly, we're talking about Englishness. We have been talking about Englishness in the last few weeks in a quite different way. You know, we haven't just been seeing it as the Englishness of the 90s or the 80s, but it's been described in some cases as a much more progressive, open-minded way of expressing national identity. Now, I don't think things change overnight, and I think there's a danger of trying to go 2012 Olympics with this England team. You know how, you know, James Bond and the Queen sailed down the Thames and everybody was like, this country's great and nothing bad will ever happen again. Didn't quite work out that way. But I think a number of those interventions are really important because they give those causes airtime and they give them space. And they also, I think, just very directly connect to more people than I think politicians could ever hope to reach, even sort of with the best campaigning.
Well, in terms of the Conservatives, then, what are the kind of banana skins for this down the line? Because I don't think Boris, as much as he's sort of made racist statements in the past, I don't think he's racist per se, and he has a cabinet that actually would reflect the fact that he's not racist, but he's just a bit of an idiot, really, and I think he's a self-serving idiot. And there is maybe a brand of English nationalism that's related to Brexit in that Conservative Party that might cause him trouble down the line. But is this something that Labour can cash in on in the sense that Keir Starmer is a far more reasoned, down the middle of the road type character who, you know, has rightly called out the Prime Minister on the fact that all of this is just hot air, what he's saying. You know, he tried to jump on the English football bandwagon and it's not convincing. But can Labour gain ground somehow on the back of all of this down the line?
My gut feeling is no. Mainly because I don't think the party is adept enough to try and make ground out of it, as cynical as I think that would be. And also, I think the people who would be most connected to these issues will be well aware of the Labour Party's numerous issues when it comes to racism. You know, a sort of getting your own house in order is very much needed there. And it's not just on issues of anti-blackness, it's issues of Islamophobia, it's anti-Semitism as well.
It's a broad range.
A broad range of racist issues. Unfortunately, I think to an extent, and I'm saying to an extent, I'm not a political party member of any party, but to an extent, it would appear from party members that I've spoken to across the board, all parties have pretty serious problems with racism and party structure that would need dealing with. So sorry to ramble on a bit, but the broad answer is basically no. I don't think the Labour Party is going to cash in on this. I also don't know if this is the sort of thing that will filter down into voting intention. I think this could be much more of a narrative thing that plays in the background, and it's probably more of a societal conversation which we're having right now. I don't know that it makes people go the next time YouGov or Survation asks them and change from Johnson to Starmer. I think there are bigger barriers between those two.
Well, actually, let's personalize this a bit then. So what is it like as a Black person in England at the moment with all this going on? Because one of my issues with the Black Lives Matter movement and, you know, the internet kind of wave of support from white people on that is it's very easy for white people who don't have any Black friends, who can't really relate to a Black person's life, to say that it should be this, it should be that. We've seen all the controversy in the US, obviously George Floyd and all that over the last year or so. But as a Black person, this Euros has been fascinating. And you know, sadly, a white mate of mine would say to me after the penalty shootout, 3 black kids are after missing penalties for England, you can be certain they're going to get a hell of a lot of social media abuse. And of course, he was right.
Yeah, I found a lot of those events really distressing. I was in a pretty bad way on Monday. Admittedly, a large part of it was seeing us lose on penalties.
By the way, everyone in Star Sports seemed to be in a bad way on Monday, but it all seemed to be hangovers related apart from you.
To be fair, I must admit, part of that was there, but I was very upset at seeing all that abuse. It's never ever easy to deal with. It's always rather heartbreaking. Then seeing it in real life, I saw video instance in real life that was very jarring. I found large parts of this discourse very either angering or distressing, depending on what you see. I must say, I think it's good that we're having sort of the national conversation and that it's being brought to the fore and that we have people who just are unashamed in their backing of these causes. I should add not just the young black people in the team, but also the backing that they've got from Gareth Southgate and the backing that they've got from like the senior team leaders like Jordan Henderson. But a lot of what I've heard this week feels very regressive. I watched BBC Politics Live this morning. It's a talk show shown on the BBC. It's pretty much daily, I think, in the week when Parliament's in session. And one of the guests on was Melanie Phillips. I'm going to make a pretty personal point. Anybody who knows me well knows that I'm not a fan of Melanie Phillips. I think I do not think she's the sort of person who deserves a place in mainstream media, yet she continues to have one. And she came up with 45 minutes of absolute bile. This then went on into Prime Minister's Questions, where Keir Starmer went very hard on Boris Johnson and the government for their stances, basically, on taking the knee. And we had to deal with, I think it was Johnson saying basically words to the effect of basically no government ministers or the government backing England totally, and of also the government saying, that we don't encourage booing of the players, and we're fully behind the team. Now, in the friendly stage, in between the gap where we'd played, I think it was Romania. No, we'd played Austria and we'd finished playing Romania, and there had been boos in Middlesbrough for taking the knee, and the government was being asked about whether there'd be sort of repercussions or whatever for fans that had done this and what the situation is going to be going forward. And there was a pretty explicit, rejection, and I believe it was in The Guardian, of the idea that, there should be repercussions for these fans, which I found, I must say, pretty dispiriting, because whether or not you might agree with the taking of the knee, I thought at that point it was rather weird, basically, for the booing of the England national team, right, which is pretty much a national deity, to sort of be tactically basically given the go-ahead. And this is, again, personal, I'm taking this personally, but I didn't really see it much as a sort of freedom of speech matter or whatever at the time. And to be honest with you, I very much still don't. I think that it's been made crystal clear by the players. And by the way, not just the England team.
Mm-hmm. We've had issues with Ireland as well, where, we've gone to Hungary and the knee has obviously been booed by Hungarians, and our white manager obviously came out really, he's very, very left wing, actually. He's quite political for a football manager, but he came out massively defending an Irish team that is becoming, more and more mixed race with every year, if that is the right term.
I've gone on a tangent, so I'll just sort of return to course and say, I think it's very important that we remember this is already, amongst the people who are taking this gesture, been debated. It's been debated, it's been done to death. The PFA, I believe, underwent consultation with the FA and players were asked if they wanted to continue doing it. The overwhelming majority said yes. England and Gareth Southgate, the England team and Gareth Southgate and the staff, they all then discussed it. Again, the answer was yes. At what point does it become clear that we're disrespecting the personal choices of the people that we claim to idolize? Because that's what it comes down to. We're taking all of their considerations and we're essentially throwing them out because, well, we're not, but people are essentially throwing them out because they don't like the gesture, they don't like what it stands for. And it feels to me like, ironically, the people at the very center of this haven't had their views really acknowledged. Where's the consideration for that point of view? It feels a bit astonishing to me, frankly, that the England national footballers, like footballers in England, are having to do this much work or go through this, to have their point of view recognised. And again, I should say, it's everybody in the England team, the England setup.
Well, can I put it to you that England is a fractured society at the moment? I think your football fans in general reflect that. You mentioned, the booing of the knee in Middlesbrough, how any, set of national fans would think after the tournament that Denmark have had, that booing the Danish national anthem was a nice thing to do, is almost equally astounding. And if you bring some of these, I would argue, morons into a football stadium, there's not a lot you can do about it.
Yeah, there isn't. I mean,
there's not a lot you can say to, no, this is how you behave, because they're just out there, and they're also on the internet.
They are. Again, these things don't change quickly. I was actually asked on Twitter today, where do you think this will be in, William, I think they made a typo here. They said, in 200 years, do you think anything would have changed? Or let's say in the next 40 years, assuming you're about 35 years old, I'm actually 26, but the point still stands. I'd like to, if it's any consolation, if that person is watching, I feel 200 very frequently.
Nice. I work out that you'll just be a pensioner in the actual 26 years of age, being 40. But I don't know what pension age you'll be at that time. Maybe there won't be any such thing. Who knows?
Yeah, gosh, that's not on 101 shop. But digressing, I think we will see change, but it will take a long time. You have to look at, we still have to go through now, but you also look at the situation 40 or 50 years ago. Societies do change. It's a matter of how fast and can you keep those changes. It feels, I think, to many people like we're having to fight harder and harder just to maintain ground, or that in some cases we're actually regressing. So, this is never going to be over. This is going to continue. And it's not the first time either that we've had, national discussion about race, in which ugly things have been said. In the aftermath of George Floyd, that happened. There were protests here. It happened. It will probably at some point, I would imagine, happen again. Maybe in 5 weeks or so when the club season comes back up, it'll be interesting to see if in full stadiums players take the knee, and if so, the response. Because we didn't get that, really. We didn't really get that. There were only partial attendances when players took the knee in this country.
Yeah, I hope you're enjoying this podcast where we're kind of going from one tangent into another, like a tangent within a tangent, but I think we're getting to the heart of some very important discussions. And I sometimes wonder, is it racism or is it social alienation of a particular group of people who want something to be angry about, and bringing that to the US? What really, really annoys me, and this is why I despair for humanity. And you're looking at, the records kind of temperatures that have befallen Canada and parts of the US this year. And climate change is a massive issue, obviously. So where are we going as a species? But I despair for us as a species when I see that Donald Trump could feasibly get re-elected again in the US. He's had a rally in which he's, repeated the same old lies about the election being stolen. This is a man who is overtly racist, I would argue, in many ways. He's not only overtly racist, but he's tried to win elections based on his racism, pandering to the kind of anger of some of his saddles that support him. So that's kind of a bit of an angry way of getting to our US section, which will conclude the show. I see Bernie Sanders had an interesting lunch with the New York Times writer, whose name I forget. Famous Irish-American New York Times writer, met Bernie Sanders, had lunch with him, and he spoke about his plans for the US and how he's getting on so well under Biden and so forth. Trump is hovering in the background, and you make the point that Maureen O'Dowd was the name I was thinking of. You make the point that Trump is hovering in the background. I could still see him being re-elected, or I certainly could see him being the Republican candidate in the next election.
Yeah, I think 7-2 is a price that will come under some pressure. I think 7-2 would start to be the Republican candidate. I don't know for how much longer that lasts. I think he almost needs politics now for the relevance of his brand, and whatever sort of legal troubles he might come into. I think very much that he wants the attention, he needs the attention, he needs the financial support he gets when he does something like that. And last but never least, there's a sizable amount of Americans who are still Republican affiliated who don't believe the results of the presidential election and who want it overturned. And I think they're more than happy to wait 4 years or whatever to do it. I think they're more than happy to stick by Trump. I also just don't think there is really a stand-up Republican name. Ron DeSantis is the person I can think of who could take that mantle of somebody as having Trump politics and being in his sphere and getting the approval. But even then, I don't really think there's a substitute for Trump himself. And I think if he wants it, he's not a 7-2 shot to get it. I think that's the bottom line. It's a long way away, but that was something when I was looking back on that I thought was a bit out of kilter. I'm just merely on the Democrat side. Again, we're a long way away from, the actual campaigns, but the midterms next year will be a pretty important test of the Democrats' performance so far. And you can get 7-4 Harris and 2's Biden. I think the longer as this term goes on, the more likely it is that Biden goes for re-election. There's lots of challenges for him, but everything so far appears to have been steady, and there doesn't appear to be, any obvious rocks being thrown from inside the Democrat Party at him. And I don't really see an obvious contender jumping out to run against the incumbent president. I think that's a difficult conversation that the Democrat Party will have to have with itself, but I only think it happens if the midterms are truly awful for them. And at the moment, even though we're quite far away, I don't yet see a collapse of that kind, but everything can change quickly with US politics.
Thanks a million for your time, William.
Thank you very much for yours.
Yeah, that was the polling station. Some interesting topics I think you will agree covered, and we shall be back next week.